With all of our environment set up and our products created, we are ready to begin building our flow. Head over to Integrator.io and log in. From the home screen here, you can see your integrations in the default form of tiles. Each tile provides a bird's eye view of the integration status. At a glance, you can see the name of your integration, how many flows are inside, and whether or not there have been any errors since last running any of these flows. You can also switch to a list view of your integrations if you would prefer. The list view will provide you all of the same details, but will also show the applications used by flows inside of this integration. Let's clarify the difference between a flow and an integration. Think of an integration as a folder that holds flows. Meanwhile, the flow is the actual process that manipulates data. Our first step is to create the integration containing our new flow, ensuring that everything stays organized. Click the blue Create button at the top right and select Integration to begin. A best practice for naming your integration is to ensure you mention the endpoints that you'll be using for the flows inside. With that in mind, we'll start by naming this integration Shopify-Salesforce. Since I'm building this integration as an example, I'll call this an example integration. With your integration named and described, click Save and Close, and we'll move on to creating the flow. Looking in the top left, you'll notice we are inside of our most recently created integration folder under the Flows tab. A prompt tells you that this integration currently contains no flows. Click Create Flow Now to begin configuring a new flow. Take another look in the top left. We have now moved into a Flow Builder screen for a new flow placed inside of the new integration. Let's begin by naming our new flow. Recall that mentioning the endpoints you'll be using is useful when naming an integration. This also applies to naming flows. However, since flows work directly with data records, it is also best to mention what types of records you'll be working with. Our goal is to eliminate manual updates in Salesforce by integrating the flow of product information from Shopify to new product records in Salesforce. In other words, data travels out from Shopify and into Salesforce. With that in mind, we'll name our flow Shopify Products to Salesforce Products. With our flow named, we'll move on to adding a source. A flow can have multiple flow steps as part of the overall source. Each step in the source is called an export. These exports pull in data using a connector and send it through the flow from left to right. Every flow needs at least one export step as its source. Click the Add Source symbol in the first flow step to get started. A search bar for supported applications will appear on top. Below, you have a choice to reuse previously created imports or build your import from available imports in Celigo's marketplace. For this flow, we'll build our own import for Shopify. Click into the search bar on top and a list of supported endpoints will appear. These endpoints are categorized as databases, universal connectors, and plain connectors. Databases connect you to popular relational and non-relational databases such as MySQL, Snowflake, MongoDB, and others. Plain connectors give you a simplified way to connect to popular business applications such as NetSuite, ADP, Slack, Acumatica, and many more. Universal connectors offer a more raw approach to connecting to any website or file server. With connections like HTTP, FTP, GraphQL, and more, you can integrate with practically any application. We'll use the search bar to narrow down the choices and start typing in Shopify. After selecting Shopify, we will be asked what we want to do in this step. In the dropdown, we're given options to export records or listen for real-time data. When we run the flow, we want to export products from Shopify, so we will pick Export Records from Source Application. Now, click Create from Scratch to move on to the Export Configuration screen. Next, we need to add a connection. A connection is an object with the credentials needed to safely access your data. Since we haven't connected to this new Shopify environment before, we don't currently have a connection to use. Click Create Connection to begin creating your connection to Shopify. We are now presented with a form we'll use to configure the new Shopify connection. When building flows, always make sure to look for recommended options or processes. For Shopify, it is recommended to create your connection directly from the Shopify App Store. Follow the Continue at the Shopify App Store link to start building your connection. We are now taken to the Shopify App Store. Click Install App to install the Integrator IO app with your new Shopify test store. The screen informs you of the permissions granted to Integrator IO and what data it can access. Acknowledge this and finish installing the app. After the app installation, a landing page asks us to name our connection. By following the recommended process, all the details for the connection have been collected in prior steps. We just need to supply a name. I'm naming mine Shopify-Larry's Lamps so I know what store this connection relates to. Click Save and Authorize. We are now placed in the Connections section of the Resources tab. Here, you will find your newly created connection along with any others you may have created with this account. These connections and other integrator resources are modular, meaning you can reuse them in other flows. For example, if you have other flows connecting to this Shopify test store, you can reuse this connection from the start without having to create a new one from scratch. To add the new connection into the flow, we'll return to the home screen and click on our integration tile. Once back at the Flow Builder screen for the new flow, go through the process of adding a Shopify source one more time. This time, click on the search bar and find the new connection. A green circle beside the connection will indicate that it is online and ready to go. Now, the Shopify connection is complete and attached to this flow step. Time to name and configure this export step. Recall that an export is a type of source. It is a flow step that collects data from an application and passes it along. In this step, our goal is to grab data on products from Shopify, which will be sent to the rest of the flow. A descriptive name we can use for this step is Get Products from Shopify. Next, we're prompted to select a value for the resource field. This is where we broadly choose what records we want to export. The value we select for this resource relates to the Shopify API. It's important to know that every application's API is unique. They use varying terminologies, authentication methods, fields, and data types. As such, the forms we need to fill out to integrate different applications will vary. Integrator makes working with APIs easier by letting us answer intuitive questions in its UI while it takes care of the technical details. Here, we need to select the type of resource to export from Shopify, which offers various groups of records. Our focus is solely on product information, so we can scroll down to search for products. Although there are many aspects of products we could explore, we're interested in basic product details, so we will select the products:"product resource. Next, we choose the API endpoint. This is us answering the question of what we would like to do with products. Our goal is to get all the data about all of our products, so we will select Retrieve a list of products. The last thing we need to configure is the export type. By default, the export is set to all. This means Integrator will find all the products of this store and export them into this flow. Other options for this step we can use are delta and limit. A delta export will logically look at records before it sends them over. For example, if no product details have changed since the last time the flow ran, a delta export will just avoid sending them, since we know that they're already there. However, if some details have changed or new products have been added, the delta export will send those over. The limit export can be useful for testing. This export allows you to set a hard limit on the amount of records sent. Leaving the limit at 1 can allow you to work with processing a single record before processing many. For our purposes, an all export is fine. Leave this as the export type, and this step is finished. Before we save and close, let's explore the preview feature to see exactly what data our flow is retrieving. The preview feature is a powerful way to check your work before going any further. Click the preview button and look over the data that appears in the window below. The preview accurately reflects the success of one page containing 3 records. This matches my expectations as I added 3 products to my test store. Make sure this number matches up to the products you added to your test store. Below is the actual data. This data is notated in the popular data transfer syntax of JavaScript object notation. Let's explore the preview text for things you recognize. Color coding makes this easier to read. The field names are written in red. Beside these fields are green and orange values. Green values are strings of text, and orange values are numbers or other data types. Look among the green text for the name of some of your products. Here is one of my products. Notice that Shopify refers to the name of products as their title. You can tell that we have plenty of data. Don't worry if there are a lot of unfamiliar field names and values. In the next steps, we'll select only the data that we need. Everything looks good. We'll click Save and Close to complete our export step. Now, our flow pulls in data on all products in our Shopify store. The next step is to add the Salesforce import. On the right side, a blank step asks us to add destinations and lookups. One type of destination is an import. An import is a step that connects to an application and affects it based on data it's received from earlier flow steps. In this case, our Salesforce import will receive product data from Shopify and create corresponding products in Salesforce. Click Add Destination/Lookup, then click into the Application search bar on top to get started. The application menu will pop up. We'll search for Salesforce and continue. Integrator will then ask what we would like to do with records. We want to import products into Salesforce, so import records into destination application is the right choice. Click Create from Scratch to get started configuring the import. Now, we need to create our first Salesforce connection. Click Create Connection and look over the form that appears. No external process is recommended this time, so we'll fill out the form and configure the connection here. Go ahead and name this connection something that makes it easy to distinguish. I'm naming it Example Salesforce Connection. The account type is the next prompt we'll select. Production is fine for the purposes of this flow. Next, we're asked to choose the OAuth 2.0 flow type. This means Integrator knows we'll be using OAuth 2.0 as our authentication method, but it needs some extra details to connect to Salesforce. We're presented with 2 types, JWT bearer token and refresh token. The help bubble can assist us in deciding which one is right for this flow. We can see that refresh token is most useful when we need the API to interact on our behalf. Meanwhile, JWT token is used for processes that don't usually require user interaction. We want Integrator to act on our behalf as a user, adding products the same way we would if we were using Salesforce. For that reason, we'll select Refresh Token. That's all we need to configure to create this connection. Click Save and Authorize to continue. You may be prompted to log into Salesforce if you aren't already. Your connection will now be added to your import step. Make sure the green circle icon indicates that your connection is online. Now, we'll configure the rest of the import. Name your import using the same conventions you used to name the earlier Shopify export. This step will take product data and write it into Salesforce. Therefore, we can name this step of the flow Post Products to Salesforce. Now, select the Salesforce API type from a list of buttons. Recall the recommended option is typically regarded as the best option. With that in mind, we'll select SOAP. Now we're asked to pass in the S object, or Salesforce object. The help bubble tells us that S objects are records in Salesforce. We know that we're dealing with products, so we'll use the search bar below to find and select Product. With our API type and S object type selected, a new Operation menu appears. This can be thought of as integrator asking us what we'd like to do with products based on the data that this step receives. We'd like to take that data and insert it into Salesforce in the form of products. As such, we'll select Insert. After naming our step and filling in a few fields, we're finished configuring our import. Click Save and Close to finish configuring this import step. Our flow is now set up to send data from Shopify to Salesforce, which is primed to create products. Our next step is to add mapping to our flow. To understand what that means, let's revisit the preview window from the Shopify export step. Click the preview button and check the output. This is all the information about products in Shopify that will travel through this flow. On its own, Salesforce doesn't know how to use this data to create products. We need to direct specific fields of data for each Shopify product to corresponding fields for products in Salesforce. For example, we need to connect the title field to the name field of the product in Salesforce. If we have a price, we'll connect that to the price of the Salesforce product. This process of telling integrator which fields correspond to each other in an import is known as import mapping. Think of it as a series of instructions that integrator uses to direct data to its proper place. We'll close out of this export configuration and turn our attention back to the import step. The plus icon in a flow step gives you access to more options for configuring that step. Click the icon and notice 3 new options present themselves. On the left, we have an input filter. An input filter allows us to define a set of rules that will determine if a record is used by this flow step. For example, maybe we have a rule not to process product records with a price under $1. Records with this feature will match the filter rules and bypass this step. On the far right, we have a hook. This allows you to write custom JavaScript code to affect data flowing through however you'd like. To the left of the hook symbol is the mapping symbol. Here, we can define the import mapping of this step, effectively telling integrator which fields of Shopify products to use to create corresponding products in Salesforce. Let's click this symbol and get started mapping. Now, we're presented with the mapping screen. This mapping screen is intuitively understood as mapping a field from the left to the right. Notice on our left, we have our source record fields, which integrator recognizes as being from Shopify. These are fields that describe products in Shopify, as we saw in the export preview earlier. On the right, we have all the potential fields of a product in Salesforce that we can write to. Note something similar to a preview to the right of the destination mapping side. This input window is an example of one record traveling through. You can reference this for insight into what each field holds as you do your mapping. The first field we'll map over is the ID of a product in Shopify. A record ID in most applications is typically a field containing a series of numbers or both letters and numbers that are kept unique so that it can be used to specifically identify a record. The first field we'll map over is the ID of a product in Shopify. A record ID in most applications is typically a field containing a series of numbers or both letters and numbers that are kept unique so that they can be used to specifically identify a record. By storing this ID in the corresponding Salesforce object, we have a unique identifier that can be used to find this object in Shopify. Click the left side of the mapping pair to select a field. We'll select ID. Now, on the right, we'll pick External ID as the Salesforce product field to write to. Go ahead and start typing external ID in to narrow down the possible fields we can map to. Next, we'll get the names of products. Note the input preview window on the right. You can see the name of a product is referred to as a title in Shopify, so we'll select that on the left. On the right, we'll pick product name. Now, our mapping is prepared to create a product with the same name as products that are coming through. Salesforce products will also have the Shopify ID of these products, giving them a reference back to the object that they correspond to. Click the Preview button in the top right to see the data that will be used to create products. Notice that we've significantly cut down on the data needed. The last field we'll map to is the active status of products. In Shopify, a field called status is used to track active objects. Notice the data type used is a string of text in the preview. The string active is used for the value. However, in Salesforce, the active status of a product has a different data type than a string of text. Salesforce uses a Boolean, a data type that only accepts one of two values, true or false. We'll set this field as true using a special type of mapping known as hard-coded mapping. To get started, select active on the right side of a new mapping pair, since we know that's the field that we're going to write to. It's fine to leave the left side blank for now. Click the settings icon to the right of this mapping pair to configure settings for this mapping. Notice the field mapping type checklist below. By default, this mapping is set to standard. We've used this mapping before for the past two fields. This is a simple writing of one field using another. We also have lookup mapping. There are two types of lookup mapping, dynamic mapping and static mapping. Dynamic lookup mapping will search through the destination application using a set of rules. The value found according to those rules will be used for the field. Then we have static lookup mapping. This is like creating a table for decoding values. For example, suppose you are mapping product names and have a naming convention in one application of adding SHP to the beginning of products, but you don't want to keep this convention in the other application. Type the prefixed names on the left and the value you want them to be translated to on the right. So, when Integrator sees one of these export field values, it will use the corresponding import field value for mapping. Next, we have multi-field mapping. This allows you to use handlebar expressions to combine multiple fields that will map to a single field. For example, suppose you are mapping customer data from an application that splits the first name and last name into two separate fields. Your destination application puts them together in one field called name. You can select these fields and write them over together as one field. For the active field, we'll be using the hard-coded mapping type. After we select hard-coded mapping, note that the Use Custom Value option is selected by default. This is the value used most commonly with hard-coded mapping. The data type for the field you're trying to map to will be detected automatically. Since the active field only accepts true or false, those are the only options we're given. If this field accepted text, we would be given a text box to type into. Select true and then save and close out of these mapping settings. Now, you'll notice true, in quotations, is mapping to the active field, and an icon with the letter H is added to the right side of this mapping pair. Different symbols would be added if we used different special mapping types. These icons give you immediate knowledge of where special mappings have been used and of what type. Click the preview button once more to see the results. That's all the data will map over to our new products, so this step is complete. Click Save and Close to return to the Flow Builder screen. Our flow is complete. If we run it now, then all data for products from Shopify will be used to create corresponding products in Salesforce. But let's check our work first with a thought experiment. If we run this flow once, we will get all our products in Salesforce. But what happens if new products are added in Shopify and we run it again? We'll end up with our new products as well as duplicates of all the other products. To protect against this, we'll need to configure one more setting in our import step. Click the import icon on the Salesforce import. Scroll down and we'll see a checkbox called Ignore Existing Records. This is exactly what we need. Check this box. Notice Integrator needs some way to determine what is and isn't an existing record. A filter is used for this purpose. Click the filter icon to the right to define the rules Integrator should use to decide whether a record is a duplicate. Now, we're presented with a blank filter screen. Click Add Filter to add a rule to configure. Notice that this looks pretty similar to the mapping menu, except there is one field in between. To define a rule for a filter, you'll select a field on either side and compare them using an operator in the middle. For example, is this field equal to this field? Is this field not equal to this field? So our goal is to create a field that identifies duplicate records. Recall that earlier we saved the ID of Shopify products into their corresponding Salesforce products using a field called external ID. The ID of a record is always unique. If we're processing a Shopify product and its ID matches the external ID of some Salesforce product, that means that we've found a duplicate. With that in mind, our rule to use for a duplicate record found can be external ID equal to ID. Save this filter and close out of the import step. After setting up the flow to skip duplicate records, we're ready to go. Just flip the toggle switch in the top right to enable the flow. Once enabled, hit the Run button to start the flow manually. Watch the Run console at the bottom to see the status of each flow step in real time. After running the flow once, you'll notice success on both steps. On my screen, it shows a success of 3 records for each step. This number should match the number of products in your store. You'll see a column marked Ignore, indicating records skipped this step because of a filter. We aimed to filter out duplicates, so after running this flow again, we should expect to see 3 records now ignored at this step. Our flow is functioning as expected. You can verify your work by checking your products in Salesforce.